Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, here with Geoff Wilson, Sports Card Investor. We're going to talk about analytics. And, most of my episodes are titled with truth in packaging, that if that sounds interesting to you, fasten your seatbelt. We're going to have a great time over 15 minutes talking about analytics in this hobby, in this industry with somebody that's really studied it. I'm kind of in the old school of last century, but Geoff is up to the minute. So first, thanks sponsors, Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, ComC.com, as well as Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. So analytics, I want to go back and forth with you, Geoff. I've read with interest some of the things you've done in your market mover tool. I want to talk about that and other things because you are a man on the move. You're not just the market movers. You're doing stuff, you're out there, and you're continuing to enhance and improve, and it's already a useful product. So thank you for your contributions to analytics and taking things to the next level, especially with the timeliness of the data, which is something that was really tough when you're doing a print publication that's covering all the cards. So thanks for what you're doing. Welcome to the show. And let's talk about analytics.
Sure. Happy to talk about analytics. I think analytics make a big difference right now in the sports card hobby. Within market movers, within all the data that we look at from eBay sales, one thing that I've noticed that has struck me very strongly in the last several months is how one card, maybe a key card in a key grade for a particular player, will oftentimes begin to move in price, start to go up in price. And then there's a little bit of a delay, and then you start to see other cards of that player start to move. And it could be other grades of the same card that start to move a little more slowly, or it could be other variations, or even other sets of the same, player's rookie card or something of that nature. And so I think, one form of analytics that I like to look at is what the ratio is between all of these different types of cards and grades to keep an eye on things and to see when maybe there's something off in terms of, what that ratio normally looks like, and then what that ratio actually looks like at this moment for a particular card.
Well, I knew you were going there, and we looked at ratios when we're doing the price guides back in the day to try to make sense of it. If pricing cards, whether what I was doing or what you're doing was completely formulaic, they wouldn't need your podcast, they wouldn't need your tool, they wouldn't need an online or a print price guide, because you would just know, you just follow the formula. So it's not formulaic. There are exceptions and there are market imbalances. But here's the issue that's come up, and when we've talked about whether there'll be a correction in our industry, and I'm saying it's not about whether there will be one. But here's the nature of the correction that you're going to be helpful with. And that is that the way you talk about this, looking at the PSA 10 and then the PSA 9 looks like a bargain and all that, almost all the examples that you give and that most people give are when the PSA 10 gets way up there, then it makes the 9 look like a bargain. When there's a correction in the industry, what's going to happen is that the PSA 9 is going to be the established price, for example, and the 10 is going to look overpriced because enough cards have been graded that things have settled in, and people say, you know what, if I can get a 9 for this, and it's already happening somewhat now with a few cards. So the ratio is absolutely one thing to look at, but if it's too high or too low, that may be, it could be a problem with the numerator or the denominator. And so when there's a correction, I don't think it's going to be a crash on Michael Jordan cards. It's going to be, I'm not willing to pay that ratio. I'm not paying 4 times as much for a 10 as I am for a 9. And that actually can be healthy. So the ratio can work both ways. It can pull something up, which is what has been happening now, or it could pull something down. So do you want to respond to that? Is that, maybe you're already doing that, but I think there's a lot of blue sky that things are going up, and they generally are.
Yeah, no, that's fair. We did have, it would be interesting to go back and look at the last few weeks of March, because that's the only time in recent memory where we actually saw prices dip consistently across a number of cards, right? We did, according to my data, we typically saw somewhere between a 20 to 40% price decrease across most of the cards that we're tracking that last few weeks of March of this year, due to the pause in sports and people suddenly being uncertain about the economy and everything of that nature. It would be interesting to look at what the ratios did during those times, and if what you just suggested in terms of did the PSA 10s actually pull back quicker because they were the ones that were more expensive compared to the PSA 9s, just as an example, or the BGS 10s compared to the BGS 9.5s, however you might want to look at that. That'd be interesting to look at. And I don't have that data on the top of my fingertips, but it is kind of nice to be able to have a full cycle of data to look at. Whereas for a long time, we only had data in a market where everything was going up. We do actually have a few weeks that we can examine of data in a market where things started to go back down.
Well, okay. I think that's good. Anyway, my point is whether you're doing trends or ratios, whatever, especially your excellent graphs that you provide that make it really easy to see what the card is now and what it was. But, you can get into trouble if you extend the line into the future. That may happen. It may even be likely that it'll happen, but there's no sure things that it'll just because something's gone up 3 weeks in a row or 8 weeks in a row. It may be due for an adjustment. And like you said, the ratio could work either way. It could be that there's so many cool cards in the industry that when something is perceived to be a little bit overpriced, people can find substitutes very easily. Very easily.
Yeah, that is true. And especially now with modern cards, it's more than ever, right? Where you've got so many different sets, so many different variations that people can move in a lot of different ways.
The analytics that I did were kind of like the big matrix, and it's a 3-dimensional matrix. And going down the left-hand side, like the x-axis, what would that be? That'd be going down the left has 3-dimensional. Going down the left-hand side, it's the player, and then going across the top is the set or the type of card that it is, and then the third dimension is condition. And so what you've done is you've narrowed it down to some, what I've seen and what people normally do. They collect their players and they collect their sets and they collect in certain conditions. So it's a manageable, it's not a Rubik's Cube, but it's a 3-dimensional thing that's manageable. When I was doing the price guides, it was all the players, all the products in every condition. And it's hard to be encyclopedic like that. But what people care about the most, when people say that your price guide or your materials are accurate, they're mainly looking at the cards that they're most familiar with and most interested in, which is really what you're tracking. And so the analytics here are really important. But we would see equivalences between products as well as between players. Are you encouraging that or emphasizing that? Because if you can see that 2 players are Siamese twins or 2 products are very, very similar in character, and when one goes up, then the other perhaps would follow. I mean, are you making it easy to do those things?
100%. And so to do those types of comparisons, I think you hit it where you got player, you got grade, and then you got product, which could include sometimes variation or that type of thing, as well as the set and the year. What I like to do is isolate 2 of the 3 variables. And that's what our software does. Our software says, okay, we can either isolate player and variation and set, and then we can look across all the different grades to see how they're comparing, or we can isolate the set and the grade, but then look across all the players. So if you want to do a comparison of like, okay, within this set and within this grade, here's how all of these players compare to each other. That's another interesting, set of ratios to look at. Or another thing you can do is you can isolate the player and you can isolate the grade, but then you can look across the different sets and say, well, isn't that interesting that that his Prism card is double in price from his Optic card, whereas another player of his same ilk, his Prism card is only 1.5 times his Optic card or something of that nature. So I think if you can isolate 2 of the 3, and then variable the third, and then look at what that looks like from a ratio and analytics perspective, and then do that multiple times across either multiple players or multiple sets or multiple grades. That's where you can get some really interesting comparative data that I think can expose some inefficiencies in the marketplace.
Are you doing, again, this is, you don't have to disclose this, but I mean, to what extent are your picks kind of a push attempt for things that have surfaced through your software?
Well, I have softened on actually giving out picks of specific cards, because the subscriber base has gotten big. And I don't want to encourage an environment where a lot of people run out and buy a card just because I, pick a specific card. Instead, I want to encourage education and research and give people the tool set to be able to make informed decisions on their own. Now, I do still do a weekly column where I talk about but I've changed the column. I used to do a card pick of the week, and now I've changed that to say cards I'm buying and selling and why.
Okay.
And I've included 4 other authors in the column as well. And all 5 of us, and this is something for our members, this is behind our member program, our paywall, all 5 of us write about cards we're buying or selling and what our thought process is as to why we're making that decision. And what I'm hoping is that people don't just go out and blindly, buy a card because it's in the article, but rather that people think about the reasoning why we're making a recommendation, and that they learn from that, and that they're able to then access data and analytics on their own through our Market Movers platform or through other platforms, and then they're able to use that information to be able to make informed decisions.
Okay, I got one last question. I think somebody did an article on your site, and it was about the size of the market, and I'm sure you read it because it's on your site. What did you think about that, and what do you think the size of the market is for sports cards? And then
That's,
I will answer after you. I want to give you first dibs, but
you might, I mean, and you might have a better idea. So one interesting thing about the size of the market with sports cards that makes it difficult to measure is, are you counting every time a card gets resold and resold and resold and resold again, right? And because obviously over the course of a year, a card can get resold multiple times. And so if you're counting that, with each transaction, then obviously that makes the market larger and larger and larger, the more throughput of volume of resell and flipping of cards there is. I believe, I would say that with confidence, I could say if we're counting all of that activity with confidence, I believe it's at least a $2 billion market right now. And my best guess would be in that ballpark. Well, honestly, I put it north of that. I bet I would guess 3 billion as a market size. And my reasoning behind that is I know eBay does a huge volume. I know they, their category is their sports card category is very, very large. Yeah. Then you've got, some other big players in the market like Homsi, which don't do nearly the volume eBay does, but it's still significant what they're doing. Then you've got the manufacturers that are producing the product to begin with, selling to the distributors. And then you've got obviously the retail that's taking place at retail stores and hobby shops across the nation. I'm confident all of that adds up to at least 2 billion. And I would not be surprised if it's, a decent amount beyond that.
I'm looking at it in a different way because I think it's way, way more than that. But I take your point. But I think eBay is doing a lot more than a couple billion, although there's some churning in there. I'm not denying that. But if we were to, and again, if I was going to get another degree and write another thesis or dissertation, which I'm not, if you had the United States of baseball cards or United States of sports cards and treated it as a nation with a gross national product, with the kind of a P&L, the assets, the balance sheet, all this kind of stuff, I think the number, I don't even know that we're looking at it the right way. I think the number is way, way more than that. And it does include churning, but those are sales. That's not the number I'm concerned about. The number I'm concerned about is with this latest inflation of prices is the total value of all the cards. Mm-hmm. I think that's more than 100 billion. And that's what's scary to me. If one recent card, 17 years old, can be worth, $1.8 million, and if you tried to corner the market on all the LeBron cards, you could be talking about $100 million right there in terms of the value, or even more maybe.
I think it would actually be more than that. Yeah, I think
$100 billion in cards out there. If somebody was a trillionaire and said, "I'm going to buy all the cards," I don't think they could do it for $100 billion. What we're talking about is the float. We're talking about what's changing hands in a year, and if that goes up from 5 billion this year to 6 billion next year, that's not a big deal if there's 100 billion in play. It's like a stock that's thinly traded. There's a lot of cards out there. So it's not like there's 10 billion cards in $10 billion worth of cards, and 5 million are changing hands every year. A very, very small percentage are changing hands. And and what's problematic in the analysis is that some are changing hands a lot in a month. I mean, they're going back and forth and flipping several times a year. So anyway, I'm not sure how to do that, Geoff. I just thought I'd bring that up with you because you're interested in these things. So
it's a fascinating question. It's a fascinating question. You could do the study across the value of one particular player. There is a website, Roto Grinders, that's in the fantasy sports world that's gotten into sports cards recently, and I've done some collaborative projects with them. And what they've done, which I thought was kind of an interesting study on their website, was they tried to figure out the PSA market cap for a certain player's rookie cards, is what they call it. And they're taking.
And that's just the rookie card. So
that's just the rookie cards, right? And I read some of the numbers, like for Luka Doncic or LeBron, they were coming up with upwards of 100 million as their market cap. I think it might have been north of that for LeBron. And that was just for his most popular rookie cards. I think there are probably some other variations in that they didn't include inside their study, and it was only PSA graded. So it probably is well beyond what their study showed, but it was still a kind of an interesting way of looking at things and in an interesting comparative between different players.
We're out of time, and I'm really sad because we could go on, but that's enough for now. I want to get some listener feedback. You're welcome to take this and run with it, but basically, I'm just going to go on the record of saying I think there's more than $5 billion worth of cards sold the last few years, each year, and I think the market cap is over 100 billion. And so, if there's a 5% float, that's good. If it goes up to 10%, is that going to be an oversupply? I don't think so. If it goes down to 4%, but it's a bigger hobby than what we think.